The morning sun barely touched the rocky hills of Afghanistan when Sergeant Marcus Thompson's radio crackled to life. His 8-man patrol had been walking through the narrow valley for 3 hours, checking on a remote village that had gone silent for weeks. The intelligence report suggested Taliban fighters might be hiding there, but everything seemed peaceful. Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead as he scanned the ridgeline above. Something felt wrong. The birds had stopped singing, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. His team spread out in formation, weapons ready, boots crunching softly on the dusty ground. The village appeared around a bend in the valley. Mud brick houses sat empty, doors hanging open like broken teeth. No smoke rose from cooking fires. No children played in the streets. It was as if everyone had simply vanished overnight. "Control, this is Bravo 7. Thompson spoke into his radio. "Village appears abandoned. Requesting permission to investigate." The response came quickly. "Bravo 7, you are cleared to proceed. Be advised, drone support is 20 minutes out." Thompson divided his men into 2 teams. 4 would search the northern houses while he led the others through the southern section. They moved carefully, checking each building, finding nothing but scattered belongings and cold cooking pots. Then the first shot rang out. The bullet struck Private Jenkins in the shoulder, spinning him around like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, crying out in pain. Immediately, the valley erupted with gunfire from 3 different positions on the surrounding hills. "Ambush, take cover!" Thompson shouted, diving behind a low stone wall. His men scattered, finding whatever shelter they could in the empty village. The enemy fire was precise and deadly. These weren't random fighters. They were trained marksmen who had planned this trap carefully. Bullets chipped away at the walls around Thompson's team, forcing them to keep their heads down. "Control, we're taking heavy fire from multiple positions," Thompson yelled into his radio. "We need immediate support." The voice that came back was filled with static and bad news. "Bravo 7, closest air support is 45 minutes out. Medical evacuation is 1 hour. You need to hold your position." Thompson's heart sank. Jenkins was bleeding badly, and they were surrounded by an unknown number of enemy fighters. The walls that protected them also trapped them. Every time one of his men tried to move, bullets forced them back down. The enemy seemed to have endless ammunition. They fired in coordinated bursts, never giving Thompson's team a chance to return effective fire. It was clear they planned to pin the Americans down until reinforcements could arrive to finish them off. As the minutes crawled by, Thompson realized their situation was getting worse. The enemy was moving closer, and his team's ammunition was running low. Jenkins had gone quiet, which worried Thompson more than the constant gunfire. The radio crackled again. "Bravo 7, be advised all available units are engaged in operations elsewhere. No backup is currently available." Thompson closed his eyes, for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility for his men's lives. They were truly alone in this valley, surrounded by enemies who wanted them dead. The nearest help was still 30 minutes away, and they might not last that long. He looked at his remaining 7 men, all of them young soldiers who trusted him to get them home alive. Their faces showed fear but also determination. They would fight to the end, but Thompson knew the end might come soon. The enemy fire intensified, and Thompson heard voices calling out in a language he didn't understand. They were coordinating something, probably preparing for a final assault. He checked his ammunition, only 2 magazines left. "Listen up," he called to his men. "We make every shot count. Watch your sectors and stay low." But deep down, Thompson wondered if they would live to see another sunrise. The valley, that had seemed so peaceful hours ago, had become their potential grave. All they could do was wait, fight, and hope that somehow, somewhere, help would come. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the trapped soldiers as the enemy closed in around them. Time was running out and no backup was coming. Thompson gripped his rifle tighter and prepared for what might be their last stand. 8 miles away, Staff Sergeant David Riley sat perfectly still on a rocky ledge, his sniper rifle resting on a bipod in front of him. He had been in this position for 6 hours, watching a suspected weapons cache through his scope. The mission was simple: observe and report. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. Riley was known as one of the best marksmen in the entire military. He could hit a target the size of a dinner plate from over a mile away. His record shot was 1,847 meters, nearly impossible by most standards. But Riley had been blessed with steady hands, sharp eyes, and the patience of a hunter. The radio on his belt suddenly came to life with urgent chatter. He listened as the desperate calls from Bravo 7 filled the airwaves. A team was trapped, taking heavy fire, and no help was available. Riley's blood ran cold as he heard the fear in Sergeant Thompson's voice. He immediately called his command post. "Overwatch 7 to control. I'm hearing distress calls from Bravo 7. What's their location?" "Overwatch 7, Bravo 7 is 8 clicks northeast of your position. All available units are committed elsewhere. Maintain your current mission." Riley looked through his scope toward the northeast. He could see smoke rising from the valley where the ambush was taking place. The distance was extreme, over 8 kilometers. Most snipers wouldn't even consider attempting a shot at that range. "Control, requesting permission to move to assist Bravo 7, Riley said into his radio. "Negative, Overwatch 7. Maintain your position and continue surveillance." Riley's jaw clenched. He understood orders, but he also understood that 8 American soldiers were about to die if someone didn't help them. He had sworn an oath to protect his fellow soldiers, and that oath meant more to him than following orders that would get good men killed. He quickly calculated the distance, wind speed, and elevation difference. The shot would be nearly impossible. At that range, a bullet would take almost 10 seconds to reach its target. The slightest breeze could push it off course by several feet. The curvature of the earth itself would affect the bullet's path, but Riley had something most snipers didn't: a custom-built rifle that he had modified himself. The weapon was perfectly balanced, and he knew exactly how it would perform under any conditions. He had spent years learning its characteristics, firing thousands of rounds in practice. Through his radio, he heard Thompson's team getting more desperate. The enemy was closing in, and their ammunition was running low. Riley made his decision. He would disobey orders to save their lives. He carefully moved his rifle to aim toward the distant valley. Through his high-powered scope, he could barely make out the village where the fight was happening. He could see muzzle flashes from the enemy positions and tiny figures moving between the buildings. Riley had been studying the enemy's tactics for months. He knew how they operated, how they positioned themselves, and where their leaders would likely be. In an ambush like this, there would be a commander directing the attack from an elevated position, with a good view of the entire battlefield. He searched the ridgeline above the village, looking for any sign of enemy activity. There, a glint of metal caught his eye. Someone was using binoculars or a scope to watch the battle below. The figure was partially hidden behind rocks, but Riley could see enough to know this was likely the enemy commander. The distance reading on his scope showed 8,247 meters. It was the longest shot Riley had ever attempted. The target was the size of a penny in his scope, barely visible even with maximum magnification. One small mistake, one tiny miscalculation, and the bullet would miss by yards. Riley controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate like he had practiced thousands of times. He adjusted for wind speed, elevation, and even the rotation of the earth. The mathematics were incredibly complex, but Riley had done these calculations so many times they were automatic. He could hear the radio chatter growing more frantic. Thompson's team was down to their last few magazines. The enemy was preparing for a final assault. If Riley was going to act, it had to be now. He placed his finger on the trigger and took one final breath. Everything in the world seemed to stop: the wind, the sounds, even time itself. Riley had entered the zone that only the best snipers ever reached, where nothing existed except the target and the shot. The rifle bucked against his shoulder as the bullet left the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second. Now came the longest 10 seconds of Riley's life, waiting to see if his impossible shot would find its mark across the vast distance of the Afghan mountains. The bullet flew through the thin mountain air at incredible speed, but Riley knew it would take nearly 10 seconds to reach its target. In that time, the enemy commander could move, duck, or simply step behind cover. At such an extreme distance, even the smallest movement would make the shot miss completely. Riley kept his eye pressed to the scope, watching the tiny figure on the distant ridgeline. The man was still there, still using his binoculars to direct the attack on Thompson's trapped team. He seemed completely unaware that death was racing toward him across 8 kilometers of empty sky. Meanwhile, in the village below, Thompson heard the enemy fighters getting closer. They were shouting commands to each other, coordinating their final assault. Jenkins had stopped responding to questions about his wound, which terrified Thompson more than the bullets flying around them. "Control, this is Bravo 7, Thompson called desperately into his radio. "We cannot hold this position much longer." "Where is our support?" "Bravo 7, air support is still 20 minutes out. Hold your position at all costs." 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Thompson could see enemy fighters moving between the buildings, getting into position to overrun their small defensive position. His men were down to their last magazines, and the stone walls that protected them were being chipped away by constant gunfire. Back on his mountain perch, Riley held his breath as he watched his bullet's path. He couldn't see the bullet itself, but he knew exactly where it should be at every moment. 5 seconds gone, 6 seconds, 7 seconds. The target hadn't moved. 8 seconds. Riley's heart pounded as he realized the shot was going to be close. 9 seconds. The enemy commander suddenly stood up, raising his binoculars again to get a better view of the battle below. 10 seconds. The bullet arrived exactly where Riley had calculated it would be. It struck the enemy commander in the chest, killing him instantly. Through his scope, Riley saw the man collapse backward, his binoculars flying through the air. The effect on the battlefield was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated enemy fire suddenly became confused and scattered. Without their commander's guidance, the fighters didn't know how to proceed with their assault. Some kept firing at Thompson's position, but others began looking around in confusion. Riley quickly worked the bolt on his rifle, chambering another round. He searched for his next target, knowing that he needed to maintain the pressure on the enemy forces. Through his scope, he spotted another fighter who seemed to be trying to take command of the group. This second shot was slightly easier. The target was more exposed and hadn't yet realized the danger. Riley adjusted his aim and fired again. Another 10-second wait, another perfect hit. The second enemy leader fell, and now the confusion in the enemy ranks turned to panic. In the village, Thompson noticed the change immediately. The disciplined, coordinated fire that had been tearing apart their defenses suddenly became wild and uncontrolled. Bullets were flying everywhere, but they weren't aimed with the same deadly precision as before. "What's happening out there?" one of Thompson's men called out. Thompson cautiously raised his head above the wall he was hiding behind. He could see enemy fighters running between positions, no longer following any organized plan. Some were retreating toward higher ground, while others seemed unsure of what to do. Riley continued his deadly work from his distant mountain position. He picked off enemy fighters one by one, each shot causing more confusion and fear among their ranks. The fighters had no idea where the shots were coming from. The sound of Riley's rifle couldn't even be heard at such a distance, so the enemy death seemed to be coming from nowhere. After Riley's fifth shot, the remaining enemy fighters began to panic completely. They had lost their leaders and couldn't understand why their comrades were falling dead around them. The ambush that had been perfectly planned and executed was falling apart because of one sniper they couldn't see or hear. Thompson realized this was their chance. "Move, get Jenkins to that building," he shouted to his men. His team worked together to carry their wounded comrade to a more defensible position, while the enemy was confused and disorganized. For the first time in over an hour, they weren't pinned down by constant, accurate fire. Riley watched through his scope as Thompson's team moved to safety. He had fired 8 shots and made 8 hits across an impossible distance. Each bullet had flown over 8 kilometers to find its target, defying the odds and the laws of physics. But Riley knew his work wasn't finished. The remaining enemy fighters were still dangerous, and they might regroup once they overcame their initial panic. He needed to keep the pressure on them until help arrived for Thompson's team. He chambered another round and searched for his next target. The impossible had become routine. Riley had found his rhythm, and he wasn't going to stop until every threat to his fellow soldiers was eliminated. The lone sniper had changed everything with a single shot, but he was just getting started. After Riley's 8th successful shot, the remaining enemy fighters began to understand what was happening to them. These weren't random accidents or lucky shots from Thompson's trapped team. Someone was hunting them from a great distance, picking them off one by one with supernatural accuracy. Ahmad Hassan, a veteran Taliban fighter who had survived many battles, crouched behind a large boulder, and tried to make sense of the situation. He had watched 8 of his best men die in the past 20 minutes, each one falling without warning. No gunshot sounds, no muzzle flashes, just sudden death arriving from nowhere. Hassan had fought American forces for years. He knew their tactics, their weapons, and their capabilities. But this was something different. This level of precision at such extreme range was beyond anything he had seen before. The shots were coming from so far away that even the sound couldn't reach them. He grabbed his radio and spoke urgently to his remaining fighters. "There is a sniper in the mountains, very far away. We cannot see him, but he can see us. We must move now or we all die." The panic in Hassan's voice spread quickly among his men. These were experienced fighters who rarely showed fear. But facing an invisible enemy who could kill them from impossible distances broke their nerve. Some began retreating immediately, abandoning their positions around the village. Riley watched this retreat through his scope and realized he had achieved something remarkable. Without firing a single shot at the main group, he had broken their will to fight. The psychological impact of his long-range precision was more effective than an entire airstrike. But Riley also knew that some of the enemy fighters wouldn't give up so easily. Hassan was trying to rally his remaining men, pointing toward the mountains where he suspected the sniper might be hiding. Riley could see Hassan's lips moving as he gave orders, probably planning a counterattack. In the village below, Thompson took advantage of the enemy's confusion to reorganize his defense. His medic was working on Jenkins, who had regained consciousness and was asking for water. The other men spread out to better defensive positions, finally able to move without immediate death raining down on them. "Control, this is Bravo 7, Thompson reported. "Enemy fire has decreased significantly. Unknown sniper appears to be providing support. Can you confirm any friendly units in our area?" The response puzzled Thompson. "Bravo 7, there are no authorized sniper teams in your area. All units are accounted for elsewhere." Thompson frowned. If there were no official snipers helping them, who was taking out the enemy fighters? He had clearly seen the disciplined enemy force fall apart, as their leaders were eliminated by precise long-range fire. Someone was out there, someone with incredible skill, but apparently not someone who was supposed to be there. Hassan had reached the same conclusion about the mysterious sniper. Using his binoculars, he carefully scanned the mountainsides looking for any sign of the shooter. The distance had to be enormous, probably over 8 kilometers based on the time delay he had observed between muzzle flash and impact. Finally, Hassan spotted a tiny glint of reflected sunlight from a distant peak. It was barely visible, just a momentary flash that could have been anything, but Hassan's experienced eye recognized it as the reflection from a rifle scope. He had found his target there. Hassan shouted to his remaining fighters, pointing toward Riley's position. "On the high peak to the west. That is where the American sniper hides." Hassan quickly calculated the distance and realized why they couldn't hear the shots. At that range, the bullet would arrive several seconds before the sound. It was an almost impossible shooting distance, but somehow the American was making it work. Riley saw Hassan pointing in his direction and knew he had been spotted. Through his scope, he could see Hassan organizing his remaining men for what looked like a flanking attack. They were going to try to work their way around to his position, probably hoping to get close enough to eliminate him. This changed everything. Riley had been safe on his mountain perch because of the extreme distance, but if the enemy fighters could get within normal combat range, his advantage would disappear completely. He would be outnumbered at least 6-1. Riley made a quick decision. He could retreat to a new position, but that would take time and might allow the enemy to regroup and attack Thompson's team again. Or he could stay and continue eliminating targets until the enemy got too close. He chose to stay. Thompson's team needed more time for reinforcements to arrive, and Riley was the only thing standing between them and a coordinated enemy assault. He would hold his position and keep shooting until he couldn't anymore. Hassan was already moving with 5 of his best fighters, using the rocky terrain to stay hidden as they worked their way toward Riley's mountain. It would take them at least 2 hours to reach his position, but Hassan was patient. He had waited much longer for the chance to kill an American sniper. Riley settled in for a long fight. He had plenty of ammunition and a perfect shooting position. The enemy knew where he was now, but they still had to cross 8 kilometers of open mountain terrain to reach him. During that time, he could continue protecting Thompson's team and maybe eliminate enough enemy fighters to end the threat completely. The battle was far from over, but the dynamics had completely changed. What started as an ambush of Thompson's patrol had become a deadly game of cat and mouse between Riley and the remaining enemy fighters. The lone sniper had already changed everything, but the most dangerous part was just beginning. Hassan moved like a ghost through the rocky mountain terrain, leading his 5 remaining fighters on a deadly mission. They had left their wounded and dead behind, carrying only essential weapons and ammunition. Their goal was simple: find the American sniper and kill him before he could eliminate any more of their brothers. The route to Riley's position was treacherous. They had to climb steep slopes, cross deep ravines, and navigate around cliff faces while staying hidden from the sniper's view. Hassan knew that if Riley spotted them moving, he could pick them off one by one from his secure position. Riley continued his deadly work, methodically eliminating any enemy fighter who showed himself around the village. He had now made 12 successful shots at extreme range, each one further demoralizing the remaining enemy forces. But he also kept one eye on the mountain approaches, knowing that Hassan's team was somewhere out there, hunting him. Through his scope, Riley could see that Thompson's situation had improved dramatically. The enemy fire had almost stopped completely, and the Americans were able to move freely around their defensive positions. Jenkins was sitting up now, his wound bandaged and bleeding controlled. It looked like they would survive until reinforcements arrived, but Riley's radio crackled with disturbing news. Overwatch 7, you are ordered to return to base immediately. Cease all unauthorized engagement. Riley ignored the order. He had already broken protocol by abandoning his original mission, and he wasn't going to stop now with enemy fighters still threatening American lives. Besides, Hassan's team was hunting him personally now. This had become more than just a military engagement. It was a deadly contest. Between professional killers, Hassan's team reached a position about 4 kilometers from Riley's mountain after 2 hours of difficult climbing. From here, Hassan could see the sniper's general location through his binoculars. The American had chosen his position well, a rocky ledge with excellent fields of fire and good protection from behind. He is there, Hassan whispered to his men, pointing to Riley's position. But getting close will be very difficult. He can see everything that moves on this side of the mountain. One of Hassan's fighters, a young man named Rashid, suggested a direct assault. We have grenades and automatic weapons. If we get close enough, we can overwhelm him. Hassan shook his head. This sniper has made 12 perfect shots from impossible distance. He will see us coming long before we can use our weapons. We need a better plan. Hassan studied the terrain carefully through his binoculars. There was a narrow ravine that ran most of the way up the mountain on the far side. If they could reach it without being seen, they might be able to approach Riley's position from behind where his field of view was limited. The plan was risky. They would have to move across nearly a kilometer of open ground to reach the ravine, and Riley would only need 1 shot to kill any of them. But Hassan couldn't think of any other way to get close to the deadly sniper. Riley sensed that something was wrong. The remaining enemy fighters around the village had gone completely quiet, not even attempting to maintain their positions. It was as if they were waiting for something to happen. He suspected that Hassan's team was getting close to making their move. Riley carefully scanned the mountains around his position, looking for any sign of movement. The afternoon sun created harsh shadows among the rocks, making it difficult to spot camouflaged fighters. But Riley's trained eye caught a brief movement about 3 kilometers away, just a flash of clothing against the gray stones. Through his scope, Riley saw Hassan's team moving carefully across an exposed slope. They were trying to reach a ravine that would give them concealed approach to his position. Riley realized they had figured out his location and were coming for him personally. Riley faced a difficult choice. He could shoot Hassan's team now while they were exposed, but that would require him to take his attention away from Thompson's village. The remaining enemy fighters there might use that opportunity to launch a final assault on the trapped Americans. Or he could wait and try to handle Hassan's team when they got closer, keeping his focus on protecting Thompson. But that would mean fighting 5 experienced enemy fighters at close range, where his sniper rifle would be less effective than their assault weapons. Riley decided to split the difference. He would take 1 shot at Hassan's team to slow them down, then return his attention to the village. If Hassan's men wanted a personal fight, Riley would give them one, but not at the expense of Thompson's team. Riley adjusted his scope and aimed at the leading figure in Hassan's group. The shot was difficult, about 3 kilometers through shifting mountain winds. But compared to his earlier 8-kilometer shots, this one felt almost routine. The bullet struck Rashid in the leg, sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. The wound wasn't fatal, but it effectively removed one fighter from Hassan's team and sent a clear message. Riley knew they were coming, and he was ready for them. Hassan grabbed Rashid and pulled him behind cover, quickly bandaging the wounded leg. He looked up toward Riley's position with new respect. The American sniper had just made a precision shot under difficult conditions, while simultaneously protecting a trapped patrol 8 kilometers away. This was not an ordinary enemy. Now it becomes personal, Hassan muttered to himself. He had fought many American soldiers, but never one with skills like this. The sniper had turned what should have been an easy victory into a personal challenge between warriors. Riley returned his attention to the village, but he knew the real fight was just beginning. Hassan's team would be more careful now, but they wouldn't give up. They would keep coming, and eventually Riley would have to face them in close combat where all his long-range advantages would disappear. As the sun began to set behind the Afghan mountains, the situation reached its climax. Hassan and his 3 remaining fighters had successfully reached the ravine and were now climbing toward Riley's position from the blind side. Meanwhile, the handful of enemy fighters still around the village were preparing for one final desperate assault on Thompson's team. Riley could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Finally, the reinforcements were arriving for Thompson's patrol. But they were still 15 minutes away, and Hassan's team was only 15 minutes from reaching his position. The timing couldn't have been more critical. Thompson's radio crackled with good news and bad news. Bravo 7, medical evacuation and close air support are 10 minutes out. Hold your position. But Thompson could see enemy fighters moving into position for what looked like a last-ditch attack on their defenses. The remaining Taliban fighters knew that once American air support arrived, their chance would be lost forever. They were going to risk everything on one final assault. Riley faced an impossible decision. He could continue protecting Thompson's team for the next 10 minutes until air support arrived, but that meant allowing Hassan's team to get close enough to kill him. Or he could abandon his overwatch position to fight Hassan, but that would leave Thompson's team vulnerable during the most dangerous moments of their ordeal. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the village as the enemy launched their final attack. Riley could see muzzle flashes and moving figures through his scope. Thompson's team was fighting desperately, but they were down to their last ammunition and couldn't hold out much longer. At the same time, Riley heard rocks falling behind him. Hassan's team had reached the base of his cliff and were climbing up the final approach. Riley could hear their voices echoing off the stone walls of the ravine. They would reach his position within minutes. Riley made his choice. He would stay at his post and protect Thompson's team until the very last moment, even if it meant fighting Hassan's men at point-blank range. He quickly fired 3 more shots into the village, each one stopping an enemy fighter who was advancing on Thompson's position. Hassan appeared at the top of the ravine, his AK-47 rifle ready, his eyes scanning for the American sniper. He spotted Riley's position and signaled to his men. They had finally found their target, and now the advantage was theirs. At close range, their automatic weapons would overwhelm Riley's bolt-action sniper rifle. Riley heard Hassan's team moving into position behind him, but kept his scope focused on the village. Thompson's men were down to their last magazines, and the enemy fighters were getting closer. Riley fired twice more, buying Thompson precious additional seconds. "American sniper," Hassan called out in accented English. "You have killed many of my brothers. Now you will pay for their blood." Riley slowly turned around, his sniper rifle still in his hands. Hassan and 2 fighters had their weapons trained on him from about 30 meters away. At this distance, Riley's precision rifle was useless against their automatic weapons. "You are very skilled," Hassan said, a note of professional respect in his voice. "But your war ends here." Just then, the sound of approaching helicopters grew much louder. Apache attack helicopters appeared over the village, their chain guns already spinning up. The remaining enemy fighters around Thompson's position immediately broke off their attack and fled toward the hills. "Your friends are safe now," Hassan said to Riley. "But You will not live to see them rescued, Riley dropped his sniper rifle and slowly raised his hands. But as he did, he carefully pulled the pin from a fragmentation grenade on his belt. If he was going to die, he would take Hassan's team with him. Hassan saw the movement and realized what Riley was doing. "You are crazy," he shouted, raising his rifle. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Riley held the armed grenade, his thumb on the safety lever. Hassan and his men had their weapons aimed at Riley's chest. One wrong move by anyone would kill them all. Then American voices echoed across the mountains as a helicopter landed near the village. "This is Dustoff 7-1. We have wounded to evacuate." Hassan's expression changed as he realized the Americans now controlled the entire area. His escape routes were cut off and more helicopters were arriving every minute. His mission had failed and he was trapped on this mountain with the sniper who had destroyed his carefully planned ambush. "It seems we both have choices to make," Riley said quietly. Still holding the grenade, Hassan lowered his rifle slightly. The personal battle between the two warriors had reached a stalemate, but the larger war was over. Thompson's team was safe, the reinforcements had arrived, and Hassan's ambush had been completely destroyed by one sniper's impossible shots. In the distance, Thompson was loading Jenkins onto a medical helicopter while Apache gunships circled overhead, searching for any remaining enemy fighters. The lone sniper's intervention had changed everything, turning certain defeat into victory and saving 8 American lives. Hassan looked at Riley with a mixture of hatred and respect. They were enemies, but they were also professionals who understood each other's skills. The American had won this battle through courage, skill, and impossible shots that would be talked about for years. Riley slowly released the grenade's safety lever and reinserted the pin. Hassan nodded slightly and gestured for his men to lower their weapons. There would be other battles, other chances to settle their personal score. But today belonged to the sniper who had taken the shot that changed everything. As the helicopters filled the valley with the sound of rescue, both warriors knew they would remember this day forever. The day when one impossible shot turned the tide of battle and proved that sometimes backup comes from the most unexpected places.